I found him shivering in the basement, eyes burning through the dark. Ardan, a German shepherd puppy left to die in New York, carried the same terror I once saw in Ukraine. I remembered dogs hiding from bombs in cellars and under cars, their bodies trembling the same way. And now in this city of lights, I faced it again. A puppy frozen by fear, as if the dark itself was an explosion. For a moment, I wasn't sure he would survive the night. It was around noon when I first heard the whimper. I was walking past the old loading dock near Brooklyn Navy Yard, the kind of place you forget exists in a city that moves too fast to look down. Something made me stop. I don't know if it was instinct or memory, but I turned toward the building with the broken door and took a step inside. The air hit me like a wall. Wet, rotting concrete, rust, something else. I pulled out my phone flashlight. That's when I saw him. He was curled up in the corner, half hidden in shadow. The light caught his eyes, and they glowed green like twin coals. His fur was matted, his ribs too easy to count, and next to him, a crumpled plastic bag and what looked like the torn remains of a leash. I don't know why that last detail crushed me. Maybe because it meant someone had tied him and then walked away. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey, buddy, you alone?" He didn't move, not an inch. His chest rose barely. I crouched down slow and careful, trying not to make any sudden sounds. I'd seen this before in Kyiv in Irpin. Dogs who had gone completely still, not because they were calm, but because the world had taught them that movement brings pain. "My name's Michael," I whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Still nothing. No twitch. No blink. His eyes never left mine. I moved a little closer, just a foot, maybe two. The silence was heavy, like it had weight. My heart was beating harder than I liked to admit. He looked about 7 months old, maybe less. Still very much a puppy, but life had pulled that softness out of him. There was something in the way he lay, flat, like gravity, was stronger on him than on anything else. In the far corner, I spotted a moldy blanket pushed against the wall. Maybe someone had left it. Maybe it was his. The way his paw just barely touched it made me think he dragged it closer at some point. I've seen soldiers in war zones clutch rags with more hope than that. I lowered myself to the ground completely, sitting cross-legged on the damp floor, my back against the cold concrete wall. No sudden moves, just breathing. "You've been here a while, huh?" I murmured. "You waiting for someone, or just waiting for it all to stop?" Still no answer, just those eyes. And then for a second, I swear his side stopped moving. I held my breath. The flashlight shook in my hand. Was he breathing at all? I leaned forward barely an inch, my breath catching in my throat. The silence pressed in like the concrete around us. For a moment, I thought I was too late. Then a twitch, the slightest rise of his chest. Not a breath, more like a shudder. Relief hit me like a wave, but I didn't move. I knew better. Trust wasn't given in places like this. It had to be earned, and slowly. The basement was colder than it should have been for midday, the kind of cold that clings to your bones. Light from a broken window above cast thin lines across the floor, cutting through dust that swirled in the stale air. You could hear the city outside, muffled car horns, distant footsteps. But down here, it felt like another world. Arden hadn't taken his eyes off me. I didn't know his name yet. He was just a shape in the dark. A German shepherd puppy who looked like he'd stopped believing people could be good. But something in his gaze, that stubborn fire, told me he hadn't given up entirely. "Not yet," I whispered again. "You don't have to move. I'll just sit here a while." There was a plastic water bottle in my bag. I unscrewed the cap slowly, not making any sudden sounds. The click still echoed louder than I expected, and the puppy flinched. Not a big movement, just a jerk of his shoulder, like an aftershock of fear. But it meant he heard me. He was still present. I placed the bottle on the floor in front of me and slid it forward. That inch by inch, not toward him, just into the no man's land between us. That's when I noticed the collar. It had been broken, not slipped off. One edge frayed as if torn, not chewed, torn. There were faint lines around his neck, spots where fur was missing. I'd seen that before, too. Pressure wounds like someone had tied him tight and left him too long. "Who did this to you?" I asked, my voice low. Of course, there was no answer, but sometimes just saying it out loud helps you feel the weight of what you're seeing. I looked around the room. Crumbling concrete, a rusted pipe leaking somewhere in the corner, mold creeping up the walls like it had nowhere better to be. There were old food wrappers, a broken crate, a single rat hole chewed into the far baseboard. And next to our Don, a torn plastic bag, stiff from age, covered in grime, like someone had dumped their trash and their guilt in the same place. I shifted slightly, feeling the damp soak into my jeans. I'd been in war zones and craters and shelters where the ceilings bled water and the walls trembled. But somehow this basement in Brooklyn felt heavier because this wasn't the battlefield. It was a choice. Ardan hadn't growled yet. That surprised me. I'd seen dogs snarl through cages, bark themselves horsaro in fear, but he was silent, still, like if he made too much noise, he'd disappear. And then I realized he didn't think he was worth rescuing. He didn't move when I offered water. He didn't move when I said his name. But when I whispered, "You don't have to be scared anymore," his ear twitched. The ear twitch was small, barely noticeable, but it was something, a thread in the silence. I held on to it like a lifeline. "You heard me, didn't you?" I said gently, almost afraid of my own voice. "That's okay. That's good." Ardan didn't move again, but I saw his paws shift ever so slightly, his claws dragging across the concrete like he was bracing himself for something. I knew that posture. It wasn't defense. It was resignation. The way some dogs brace for pain before it even comes, as if their bodies remember more than they do. I wanted to reach out to close the space between us, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I lowered my voice to a near whisper. "I saw a puppy like you once in Kev. She was buried under the rubble of a house that didn't exist anymore. We had to dig her out with our hands. She didn't bark, didn't cry, just looked at us like she didn't understand why we came." I smiled faintly, though there was no one to see it. But she lived. She made it. You can, too. Ardan blinked slowly, his eyes still glowing faintly in the low light. Never left mine. It felt like some unspoken thread had been pulled taut between us. Fragile, but real. Then he moved. Not much, just a slight shuffle of his hind legs as he adjusted his position, pulling himself a little tighter into the corner. It wasn't an approach, but it wasn't flight either. It was the first decision he'd made in my presence, and it told me everything. I reached slowly into my jacket pocket and pulled out the corner of a granola bar. Not ideal food for a puppy. I knew that. But it was all I had. I broke off a small piece, chewed on the edge myself to show it wasn't poison, then gently placed it on the ground near my foot. "No rush," I murmured. "Just letting you know it's there." Arden watched it like it might explode. His body was tense, but there was a tremble in his nose, a twitch, a flicker. He could smell it. He wanted it. But hunger and fear were at war in him. And fear was still winning. He stayed still. No sudden movement. I'd learned in Ukraine that, with the most broken ones, silence was a kind of kindness. The minute stretched, the silence pressed in again, broken only by a slow drip of water from a rusted pipe behind us. Every sound felt amplified down here. My own heartbeat felt like a drum, but I didn't move. Then a sound I hadn't expected. A growl, not loud, not threatening. A low, broken vibration from deep in Ardan's chest. His lips didn't even curl. His body didn't rise. But that growl, it wasn't about me. It was about him. About the space between fear and want. About the battle inside his small, starving frame. "That's okay," I said softly. "You're allowed to feel everything." I looked down at the granola, still untouched. But when I looked back up, I saw something shift. He was watching me differently now. Not just out of instinct. Not just with fear. There was question in his eyes, like he was asking, "Why haven't you left yet?" And my answer, though unspoken, was simple. Because I've seen what happens when no one stays. I don't know how long we sat there like that. Him in the corner, me on the floor. The city above us spinning on like nothing mattered. Time gets strange in silence. It stretches and folds like your body forgets the clock when your heart is holding still. He didn't touch the food, but he didn't look away either. That was enough for now. I leaned back against the wall, feeling the cold seep through my coat. The chill reminded me of winter in Lviv. Nights when we carried dogs out of bomb shelters, their bodies stiff with fear. I wasn't a soldier. Never was. Just a volunteer who couldn't look away. Someone who figured if I had two hands, I might as well use them to carry something alive. My name's Michael Turner. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last few years learning how to sit still with broken things, even when they don't want you near. After the war, I came back home thinking the worst was behind me. I got an apartment in Brooklyn. Tried to build something quiet, but the quiet didn't sit right. I started volunteering with shelters again, checking in on tips about stray dogs, abandoned pets, anything that smelled like something left behind. That's how I ended up here in a basement off the Navy Yard talking to a puppy who hadn't made a sound. I know you're scared, I said, my voice almost too soft for the walls to catch. But you don't have to do this alone anymore. He shifted again, just slightly. His paw scraped the ground, a motion so faint I almost missed it. His body was still pulled tight, but the weight on his back leg seemed less. Like he wasn't planning to bolt anymore, just deciding whether to stay. I didn't try to move closer. Instead, I started talking, not about him, but about nothing, about the wind outside, the birds I'd seen that morning in the park, the old man who played harmonica on the corner near my building. I let the words fill the room soft and slow. I wasn't trying to convince him. I was trying to show him that not all voices meant harm. You know, I said, half to him, half to the silence. There was this shepherd mix back in Buka, tiny thing. Looked like he'd been through a washing machine full of bricks, but he let me touch his paw after 3 days. Just held it there like he was testing if my hands would shake. Still, nothing from Ardan. But his ears twitched again. It was his way of listening, his way of staying alert without giving in. I reached into my coat again, pulled out a second piece of granola, and placed it next to the first, not closer to him, but closer to the space between us. A little bridge made of crumbs. It's okay, I whispered. You can take your time. And then a breath. Not mine. His a slow, shaky inhale that lifted his ribs higher than before. He was still afraid, still fragile. But for the first time, he was choosing to breathe. The sound from above hit like a gunshot. A metal door slammed somewhere at street level. Probably wind or some construction guy kicking through debris. But down here, it echoed like thunder in a tunnel. Ardan's body exploded into motion. He spun, claws scraping concrete, and flung himself back into the corner so fast he knocked over the torn plastic bag beside him. His head dropped low, ears pinned flat, and a sharp yelp escaped his throat. Not anger, not defiance. Panic. Pure electric panic. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. That was just the door, I said quietly but steady. You're safe. It's just the door. But it didn't matter. That sound had turned his world inside out. He was shaking now. Not just a tremble, a full-body quake, like his muscles didn't know how to turn off. His front legs were locked, but his back ones twitched uncontrollably, like his body was still trying to run even though there was nowhere to go. I knew that look. I'd seen it in soldiers, in kids, in animals pulled out of wreckage who thought the sky was falling again every time a car backfired. I saw it in Ukraine when the air raid siren started, and the dogs would scatter even if they were already underground. Trauma doesn't care about geography. That basement wasn't holding Ardan. His mind was somewhere in his memory. That sound, the door, had meant something worse, something final. And right now, he wasn't in New York anymore. He was wherever the pain had started. Easy, boy, I whispered, not daring to reach for him. I'm still here. You're not alone. But he wasn't hearing me. His gaze darted around the room like it was searching for exits, like it expected someone to come back through the door with fists and fury. And maybe someone had once. I didn't know his story. Not yet. But that look in his eyes, that was someone who'd learned to associate noises with punishment. I watched his tail curl tight under him. His breathing was shallow, fast, his pupils wide. It broke me, not just because he was terrified, but because his fear was familiar, and I hated that I recognized it. I wanted to help him, to pull him out of the corner, to carry him upstairs and tell him the world was different now. But that wasn't how this worked. I knew I couldn't fix years of pain in one afternoon. I couldn't erase the echo of doors slamming shut. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed. I leaned back again gently so he could see I wasn't a threat. I didn't speak this time. No soft words, no promises, just breath and presence. Just being. And after what felt like hours, though maybe it was minutes, I saw it. His eyes shifted. They flicked from the door to me. And for the first time, there was something new in them. Recognition. That look, that flicker of recognition, it knocked the air out of me. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something. A threat of awareness. Like Ardon was slowly pulling himself out of wherever his mind had gone, back into this damp basement, back into the now where someone was still sitting across from him and hadn't moved an inch. I didn't say a word, didn't dare break the thread. Instead, I reached slowly, carefully into my jacket pocket and pulled out the wrapped protein bar I'd been saving for myself. Not dog food, no. But I'd learned in Ukraine that the moment a starving dog is willing to eat from your hand isn't about hunger, it's about courage. I peeled the wrapper back halfway, tore off a soft corner with my teeth, then placed it between my fingers and held my hand low near the ground, palm facing up. The room was dead quiet. Ardon didn't move, but his nose twitched again, stronger this time. A sharp inhale, then another. His eyes darted to my hand, then back to my face, back to my hand. It felt like a negotiation. My heart beat against my ribs like a warning. Don't push. Let him choose. And he did. First came the smallest shift. His right paw inched forward, claws dragging with a soft scrape. Then the left. His whole frame followed, one slow movement at a time. His belly still pressed low to the ground, like a soldier crawling through no man's land. I didn't breathe. He stopped halfway, stared at me again, head tilted low, ears twitching. Then he came closer. His nose touched my hand. I felt it warm, wet, shaking slightly, and I swear my chest caved in from the weight of that moment. 7 months old, ribs like piano keys, a broken collar still hanging crooked around his neck, and he just made the bravest choice of his short life. He sniffed the protein bar, paused, then licked it once tentatively, like he didn't quite believe it was real. I let go of the food and slowly drew my hand back, not wanting to interrupt whatever fragile instinct was rising in him. He chewed carefully like his body wasn't used to food coming without conditions. I watched him eat, tears burning behind my eyes, not from sadness, but from relief, from knowing that something had shifted. This was the crack in the wall, the moment when fear blinked just for a second. I whispered, "That's it, Ardon. Good boy." He froze when I said the name. I don't know why I chose it, Ardon. Maybe because it sounded strong, noble, like someone who'd been through something and still stood tall. He didn't know it was his name yet, but I did. And when I whispered it again, Ardon, he didn't flinch. Instead, for the first time, he looked me in the eyes and didn't look away. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just let that look settle between us like dust and sunlight. Because, after everything, the fear, the silence, the collapse of trust I could feel in every inch of his body, Ardon was still looking, still holding my gaze, and that meant something. I slid my hand back into my coat pocket and pulled out the spare cord I carried on calls like this. It wasn't much, just soft climbing rope, looped and worn. But it was better than reaching for him with nothing, better than a hand that might still feel too much like a threat. I whispered, "Let me help." Okay. He didn't move, but he didn't retreat either. His shoulders stayed low, his body taut. But he watched as I uncoiled the rope, looped it softly, and set it near my feet. "I'm not taking you somewhere worse," I said gently. "I've seen worse. You've lived worse. We're done with that." I let the rope sit there. No sudden movement, just time. Minutes passed. Maybe 5. Maybe 15. The city above us kept moving. Distant sounds of trucks, a horn, someone yelling across the street. But down here, it was just the two of us, man and dog, stranger and stranger, hope and hesitation. And then, with a trembling breath, Ardon stood up. It was slow, painfully slow. His back leg shook under him like he hadn't stood fully in days. His spine curved like he was bracing for a hit that never came. But he rose and he stepped forward, one foot, then another. I stayed frozen. Didn't even blink. He came close enough that I could hear his breath. close enough that I could smell the sour, damp scent of a body that hadn't been touched with kindness in a long time. I didn't reach for the rope. I let him sniff it first, let him nudge it with his paw, test its weight. Then I whispered again, "It's not a trap, just something to hold on to." Slowly, I lifted the loop, let it dangle from my fingers. Arden didn't back away. He closed his eyes just for a second and lowered his head. I slipped the rope around his neck. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Trust, maybe. Or maybe just exhaustion deep enough that it felt like trust. My throat tightened as I tightened the loop gently, just enough so it wouldn't slip. He didn't flinch, didn't growl, just stood there. "You're doing so good," I said, my voice breaking. So good. I reached out with my other hand, slow, careful, and touched his shoulder. His skin twitched under my fingers, but he didn't pull away. For the first time, I could feel how thin he was, how bony his hips were, how his ribs pushed through his fur like he'd been shrinking day by day, like his body had been giving up while his spirit refused. I slid one arm under his chest. He didn't move, then the other around his back legs. When I lifted him, Ardan let out a low, uncertain whine. The sound of a dog who didn't know what this meant, but was too tired to fight it. I cradled him close, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he let himself be held. The moment I stepped out of that basement, the sunlight hit us both like a shock. Ardan flinched against my chest, eyes squeezing shut, body curling tighter into itself. The way he trembled. It wasn't just the brightness, it was the sky, the openness. After God knows how long, trapped in that damp, rotting dark, the world must have felt endless, unsafe. I tightened my hold around him, shielding his face with the side of my jacket. "It's okay, buddy," I murmured. "You're out." Then just, "You did it." He didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I felt his heart pounding against my chest like a second heartbeat, fast and frantic. It reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. There was a German Shepherd puppy we pulled from the rubble in KKE, weeks after the building had collapsed. We'd found her wedged between a concrete beam and the remnants of a metal stairwell. When we finally got her free, the first thing she did was bury her face in my arm and cry. Not bark, not bite, just cry. Like the world was too big again, like silence had been safer. Ardan blinked up at me, his eyes watery from the sudden light. They were gold, a tired, cloudy gold, like an old photograph that had survived a flood. And in them, I saw the same question I'd seen before. Is this real? I walked slowly toward the van, parked a block away. The street was mostly empty. Just a few workers across the road unloading scaffolding. One of them glanced at me, did a double take, then nodded. "Is he okay?" the man called out. I nodded back. "He will be." Ardan didn't move the whole way there, just stayed curled into my arms, stiff but silent, like a bundle of bones wrapped in disbelief. I opened the passenger door and gently set him on the seat. He didn't fight, didn't shift, just laid there looking around like everything was foreign. And it was. The car, the air, the sound of birds, a child laughing in the distance. All of it must have felt surreal. I sat beside him for a moment before turning the key. The engine started with a low hum, and he twitched just once, but didn't panic. Progress. I reached over and opened the glove box, pulling out a small bottle of water and a travel bowl. I poured it slowly, letting the sound be soft, familiar. Ardan stared at it. Then, with a hesitating stretch of his neck, he leaned forward and licked once, then again. It wasn't much, but it was his choice. "You're doing great," I said softly. "You're safe now, I promise." His ears twitched, his tail didn't move, but he laid his head down on the edge of the seat, and for the first time, he exhaled, long and slow, like a breath he'd been holding for weeks had finally been let go. The rope was still around his neck, loose now. It wasn't a leash anymore. It was a lifeline. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other gently resting near Ardan's side as we drove through the narrow streets of Brooklyn. He didn't look out the window. He didn't whine or fidget. He just laid there, silent and still, like movement itself felt foreign. Every now and then, I'd glance at him. His eyes were half closed, but never all the way. He was still in that space between collapse and caution, not asleep, but no longer braced for the worst. I spoke to him softly, not expecting answers, just filling the space with sound that wasn't scary. I told him about the shelter I was taking him to, a clinic just outside Williamsburg that partnered with local rescues. Good people, gentle hands, no cages, unless absolutely necessary. They'll check you out, make sure everything inside you still works, I said, smiling faintly. You deserve that much. You deserve more. He didn't respond, but when I stopped talking, he shifted his head just enough that his muzzle touched the inside of my wrist. Not a gesture of affection, more like a quiet tether, a sign that my voice had meant something. It hit me harder than I expected. We pulled into the parking lot 20 minutes later. I sat for a moment before turning off the engine. Part of me didn't want to move, didn't want to disturb him, but I had to. I unbuckled, slid out, and gently reached over to lift him again. This time, he didn't resist at all. No trembling, no stiff legs. He just let himself be carried like a child, too tired to argue. The clinic wasn't fancy. A converted brownstone with peeling paint and a sun-faded sign that read Williamsburg Animal Care Center. But inside, the warmth hit instantly. The soft scent of antiseptic clean floors. A receptionist who looked up with practiced calm. I stepped in holding Ardon like a secret. She stood. "Oh, do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "But he doesn't have time to wait." She took one look at him and nodded. "Exam room 3. I'll call Dr. Nguyen." I laid Ardon gently on the cushioned bench inside the room. He looked around with wary eyes, taking in the metal table, the cabinets, the jar of dog treats on the counter. He didn't move, just watched. A few minutes later, the vet stepped in. Dr. Nguyen, mid-30s, calm face, hands that moved slow and kind. He didn't speak right away, just observed, then crouched low at getting on Ardon's level. "You've been through something, haven't you?" he said gently. "Let's take a look." "Yeah." I stood in the corner, arms crossed, heart thudding. I didn't know what they'd find. I just knew Ardon had made it this far, and I couldn't bear the thought of it being too late. "Doctor," and Nguyen checked vitals, temperature, hydration. He ran his hands down Ardon's spine, over his ribs, behind his ears. Then he stood and looked at me. "He's dehydrated, severely underweight, had no broken bones that I can feel. But if I had to guess, he's been down there a long time, and he hasn't been eating right for longer than that." I swallowed hard. "Can he recover?" The vet nodded slowly. "Yes, but he's on the edge. Another week, and this story might have ended differently." I looked down at Ardon. His eyes were on me again. And this time, when he saw me, he wagged his tail. Just once, but enough to break me open. I had to turn away for a second. That tiny tail wag hit me like a punch to the chest. Not because it was big or dramatic, but because it was so small, so fragile, like hope barely remembered how to move. "Dr. Said." Gwyn gave us space while the tech brought in fluids and some high-calorie supplements. Arden didn't flinch when the needle went in. He didn't make a sound when they clipped away the matted fur on his neck. He just laid there, still watching me. Not with fear, not anymore. With something closer to patience, like he was waiting to see if this moment would vanish like all the others before it. "I've seen dogs give up," the tech said softly as she cleaned his paws. "But he hasn't. Not fully. You brought him back right before the edge." I nodded but didn't speak. My throat was thick. I could feel my jaw tightening just to keep something from cracking inside me. He was only 7 months old. 7 months. And yet, he looked like he'd lived through 2 wars. And maybe in some way he had. While they worked, I watched the slow rhythm of his chest rising and falling. I kept thinking about the moment in the basement, the glowing eyes, the silence, the way he didn't even react when I spoke. And now, just hours later, we were here. He was here. Ardon blinked at me again and I stepped closer, kneeling beside the table. I held out my hand, palm up this time, and waited. He leaned forward just a little and pressed his nose into my fingers. That was it. No fireworks, no barking, just that. And yet, that one moment held more weight than any rescue I'd done before. Because Ardon wasn't just surviving, he was choosing to connect. They wrapped him in a warm towel and let me carry him out myself. He didn't resist. His head rested against my chest again, and this time there was no panic in his body, just a slow surrender to safety. Out in the parking lot, the sun was starting to dip. The sky above Brooklyn turned soft, streaks of orange and pale blue melting together like watercolors. It felt quieter somehow, like the city had paused just enough to give this little dog a second chance. I set him gently in the back seat, on a folded blanket I kept for cases like this. He curled in slowly, paw over nose, but didn't shake, didn't hide, just rested. I sat behind the wheel, engine humming, and looked back through the rearview mirror. His eyes were still open, still watching. "You're not alone anymore," I said softly. "That part of the story is over." And I meant it, because from that day forward, Ardan wasn't a basement dog. He was a beginning. Weeks passed. Not all at once, not in some perfect arc of healing. It was slower than that. Some days were quiet, others hard. But every single morning, Ardan woke up a little more alive. He gained weight. First a pound, then 3, then 5. His coat started to shine again, thick and warm instead of patchy and brittle. The hollow look in his eyes faded bit by bit like fog lifting off the surface of a lake. He stopped sleeping, curled in corners, stopped flinching when doors shut. The first time he barked, really barked, it scared the hell out of me. He was playing with a chew toy I'd picked up at a rescue fair, and he let out this short, sharp woof like he was announcing himself to the world. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. It felt like I was watching a ghost come back to life. One afternoon, we walked through Central Park. The leash in my hand was new, a strong nylon one with his name stitched on the side in dark thread. Ardan. Not for control, not for safety, just a reminder that he belongs somewhere now, that someone knew his name. He trotted ahead, tail high, ears alert. Every so often, he'd glance back just to make sure I was still there. I always was. We stopped near the chess tables, the old ones near the south entrance. There was a spot of sun on the concrete, and Ardan climbed onto the bench beside me, stretching out like he owned the place. I pulled a soft blanket from my bag, the same one he'd first slept on after the clinic. Laid it out. He circled once and flopped down, resting his head on my knee. People passed by. A man walking a Dijon nodded. A kid and said, "Look at that dog." And Ardan didn't flinch, just lifted his head, curious. I scratched behind his ears. "I don't know how you made it," I whispered, "but I'm glad you did." A breeze came through, warm and clean. Somewhere behind us, someone started playing a jazz tune on a saxophone. Ardan lifted his head, listening. Then he sighed. Not a scared breath, not a panic breath, just peace. In that moment, I looked at him, this German shepherd puppy who had every reason to give up and still hadn't. And I realized something that hit deeper than words. He wasn't waiting for the dark anymore. He was waiting for me. And in that quiet, golden afternoon, I finally knew he was home. Fear doesn't belong to one country. Love doesn't either. From the bombed-out streets of Ukraine to an abandoned basement in New York, I've carried dogs in my arms who didn't know why the world had turned against them, only that it had. And every time, no matter how broken, they still looked up at me with that question in their eyes. "Can I trust you?" Ardan asked me that question with silence, with his body curled into itself, with the way he flinched at light and tensed at sound. But now, he wakes up stretching, tail thumping, ready to greet the day. His journey from the cold, from starvation, from fear, wasn't just a rescue. It was a reminder that animals don't survive on food alone. They survive on kindness, on safety, on someone showing up. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Without the volunteers, the donors, the clinics that open their doors without questions, Ardan wouldn't be here. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's showing up even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Every time someone shares a story like Ardan's, it spreads something stronger than sadness. It spreads hope, and that hope can reach the next dog, and the next, and the next. Because for every Ardan, there's another puppy waiting in the dark, waiting for someone to choose compassion. So if his story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Support the rescues that make these stories possible. Every share of this story saves lives. Don't forget to subscribe the animals to YouTube channel.